Hey everyone, my name is Rory, and in this video we are going to do a full Genesis version 1.7 unboxing and installation. So we'll be installing this FarmBot on a standard 1.5 meter by 3 meter raised bed. You can find design plans for this exact bed on our documentation at genesis.farm.bot. The Genesis and the Genesis XL version 1.7 kits come in two boxes. We've got a large box, we call it the main carton, that has most of the pre-assemblies in it. And then we have the extrusion box, which is long and skinny, that has the tracks and a couple other aluminum extrusions. So let's open it up. All right, so this is the Gantry main beam. There's gonna be one of these in a Genesis kit and two of these in a Genesis XL kit. And in here are the track extrusions. There will be 4 of these in a Genesis kit and twice as many, 8, in a Genesis XL kit. So as you can see, FarmBot Genesis version 1.7 comes 90% pre-assembled in the box. This is a major improvement over version 1.6 devices. Here are all of the pre-assembled tools: the watering nozzle, the seeder, the soil sensor, and the rotary tool. We've got a box of parts here. Inside the parts box, you will find the camera calibration card and the getting started guide. You'll find the belts, the LED strip, a couple bags of screws and other hardware, some plastic parts, a few cables, and also some assembly tools. And then the major sub-assemblies and the cable carriers with all of the tubing and cables pre-routed through. The first part of the assembly is going to be putting the tracks onto the bed, and you're going to need these T25 wood screws. So let's pull those out of the box. FarmBot is going to move along the X-axis direction forward and back along the bed by riding along these aluminum extrusion tracks. New in the version 1.7 design is a custom designed profile that allows for very quick and easy assembly onto a raised bed. You basically just put it on here, and then we're gonna screw it down with these T25 wood screws. Included in the kit is a T25 bit that you can put into any standard drill. Once you've got the first track extrusion installed, we're going to put a 40mm nut bar into the lower slot of the track extrusion, halfway, about like that. And then we're gonna grab a M5 by 4mm set screw, and we're going to use the little Allen key to attach it into this track extrusion. Now finish off the connection at the joint with another M5 by 4mm set screw placed into the nut bar. When you're installing the tracks, make sure that the joint between the two pieces is very tight. You also need to make sure that the V or angled portions of the extrusions are smooth to the touch. You may need to redo some of these screws, adjust the nut bar down below to get that joint really tight. If needed, you can also use 150 grit sandpaper along these edges to smooth out the joint. If you've got a Genesis XL kit, you're gonna install 4 of these track extrusions along one side. Once you're done with the first track, repeat the process on the other side of the bed, and then you've got your tracks installed. And then as one final check, you wanna make sure that the 2 tracks are parallel and a consistent distance apart. So grab a tape measure and measure the distance across the tracks to make sure that they are the same distance all the way down the length of the bed. If the tracks deviate by more than about 1 centimeter or 0.5 inches, then your FarmBot might have trouble moving throughout the full length of the bed. You may need to add shims or other spacers to better align the tracks in case your supporting infrastructure is not perfect. Next, grab the gantry column with the electronics box, and also find in the parts box the little 8mm, 5.5mm wrench. So we're gonna be installing this gantry column on the side of the raised bed that has the wood cable carrier supports. When you first grab the gantry column, you're gonna notice that it probably doesn't fit right away. That's because the lower two wheels need to be adjusted so that they have the perfect distance from the upper wheels. To make the adjustment, get your 8mm wrench and you're going to put it onto the eccentric spacer and give it 1/8 of a turn. That is going to slightly raise and lower the wheel, and you may need to do this a couple of times and test in between each time until the gantry fits onto the extrusion. You don't want to force the gantry on. What you want to do is keep making adjustments until it slides on in a way that feels smooth and easy, but is not wobbly. There we go. See how that slid on nice and easy? Okay, there we go. We've got adjustments. It feels smooth, but doesn't have any wobble. Then repeat the process with the right gantry column. That's the one without the electronics box, and get it slid on. It's a little bit too tight. There we go. Slid on smooth and wobble free onto the other track extrusion. Next, grab the 3mm hex driver, 5 of the 40mm nut bars, the bag of M5 by 10mm screws, and the 5 plastic cable carrier supports. Also grab the gantry main beam extrusion and lay it across on the tracks. Start by inserting all 5 of the 40mm nut bars into the middle slot on the extrusion. Space them out evenly across the extrusion. You may want to use a tape measure if you want them perfect. And then use 2 M5 by 10mm screws to attach each of the cable carrier supports to the nut bars. The first of the cable carrier supports should be about 10 to 20 centimeters from the edge of the gantry main beam, or that's about 6 to 10 inches. All right, so we've got all 5 of these cable carrier supports attached to the middle slot of the gantry main beam extrusion. If you've got a Genesis XL kit, you need to repeat this process with another 5 cable carrier supports and the second gantry main beam. And then if you've got the Genesis XL kit, we'll join those together in the next step.
To join them together, grab the gantry joining bracket and loosely attach the 2 140mm nut bars to the back using 8 M5 by 10mm screws. Then slide the gantry joining bracket and the nut bars into these 2 slots of each of the extrusions. This surface of the gantry joining bracket should be in line with this surface of the cable carrier supports. Make sure that the center of the gantry joining bracket is lined up with the 2 extrusions, and push the 2 extrusions together such that there's no gap. Then tighten everything up.
Next, grab 4 of these 60mm nut bars and 8 M5 by 10mm screws and the 3mm driver. Then grab a friend and we're gonna lift up the gantry main beam and install it. Grab the gantry main beam with a friend. You're gonna want the plastic cable carrier supports facing the same side as the motor and the gantry corner brackets. You're gonna position the main beam extrusion on the front of the corner brackets. So from the front of the FarmBot, you should only be able to see the extrusion. Now you're going to take the 2 nut bars and you're gonna insert them into the back side of the extrusion into the low slot and the middle slot. And now position the gantry main beam on the brackets and insert the M5 by 10mm screws, and you can just get them in hand tight for now. So as you can see from the back side of the FarmBot, the top of the extrusion is 20 millimeters above the top of the motor and the corner bracket. So these screws are screwed into the lower two slots on the back side of the extrusion. And these cable carrier supports are on the same side of the extrusion as the motor and corner bracket. Now it's also important on the electronics box side that the extrusion is about a minimum of 20 millimeters or 1/2 of an inch beyond the motor. This will allow the FarmBot to move all the way over closest to the electronics box for accessing the seeds. And on the other side of the bed, the extrusion doesn't need to extend beyond the motor the same amount. It can be asymmetrical. Now, once you've got it positioned properly, you want to make sure that the angle between here and here is 90 degrees so that the column is perfectly upright. And then you're going to tighten all 4 of these screws. Next, grab the X2 encoder and X2 motor cables from the parts box. They should have little X2 labels on them, and we're going to connect them to the X2 motor, which is the motor that is opposite the electronics box. So find the white connectors on each of the cables. The cable with 4 wires is going to plug into the motor, and the cable with 7 wires is going to plug into the encoder, which is on the back side of the motor. So go on underneath here. Both of the connectors will only fit in one orientation, so if it doesn't feel like it's fitting, don't force it. That was the motor, and this is the encoder. There we go. Now take the other ends of the cables and route them through all of the plastic cable carrier supports along the gantry main beam. You can pull the cables by the cable, but never pull them by the connector. Next, grab the LED strip from this foil packaging. You can unspool it from the reel, and then feed the end with the connector also through all of the cable carrier supports. And make sure that you don't get this part where it transitions from the cable to the strip caught on any of the cable carrier pieces. And you'll finish this off by making sure that the LEDs are pointed down. And you can also feed the end here into the extrusion. Don't worry about plugging these in for now. We'll do that in a subsequent step. Next, grab the 2 longer belts included in the kit. Unspool the belt and take the 2 ends and put them together. Then in the parts box, find the bag of the belt sleeves and take one of them and put it over the ends of the belt, like that. Now take this and feed it down through the gantry column until it comes out the bottom. And then pull the belts all the way through. And at the very end here, make sure that the belt goes over the top of the pulley with the teeth engaging the pulley. Next, you're going to take the sleeve off of the ends, set that aside, and you're gonna make sure that you don't have any twists or crossing of the belt inside the extrusion. So look down from the top and make sure that the one side is gonna go under the wheel towards the back, and the other end is gonna go under the wheel towards the front with no crossing or twists inside. Once you have ensured that there's no twists or crosses, find one of the ends of the belt and feed it under the wheel, and then pull it all the way through. If you need a little help, you can use the hex driver here to help feed it through, and lift up the end here for grabbing. Next, grab the end of the belt and slide a belt sleeve on. Then take the belt and feed it through one of the belt clips, like so. The belt clip should be oriented so that when you are attaching it to the track extrusion, this little tab is going to be able to stop the end of the gantry wheel plate right here. So this tab should be on the outside of the bed. Then take the end of the belt and wrap it up on itself so that the teeth engage. And then slide the belt sleeve onto both portions, all the way up towards the belt clip. You may need to pull the extra belt through the system so that it lines up at the end there. And then take a 20mm nut bar and slide it into the end there. And then fasten the belt clip in place with 2 M5 by 10mm screws. Then repeat the belt securing process on the other end. So slide a belt sleeve on, feed the belt through the belt clip. With this end, there's gonna be a little bit of extra length, which is okay. You can have it underneath here. So pull this a little tight until it looks like it's gonna line up at the end there. And then slide the belt sleeve over this entire length of extra belt. You'll want to place a moderate amount of tension on the belt as you're tightening it, about the amount of tension that you'd use to tie your shoes. And then repeat on the other track with the other belt, again making sure that the tab is on the outside of the bed. Okay, now grab the X-axis cable carrier from the box. This is the smaller cable carrier with just the water tube and the power cable inside. Unspool the cable carrier, and you want the end with the end piece on it. It's gonna go near the center of the bed onto the wood cable carrier support. And the other end with no end piece connected, you're going to connect it to the pre-mounted end piece on the gantry column with the electronics box. Now it's easiest if you sort of come in at an angle and engage the first hinge point with the first hinge point on there, and then sort of put it in and straighten it out in order to get both of the hinge points to connect together. And this plastic is quite flexible. There we go. Now grab the T10 bit, that's the smaller bit included in the parts box. Insert it into your driver and get the T10 by 25mm flathead wood screws. And we're going to attach the cable carrier here to the wooden cable carrier support. You'll need to sort of bend these cables and stuff out of the way for a moment. Now take the water tube coming from the cable carrier and route it through this opening here, and then connect it to the lower brass adapter on the solenoid valve assembly. And you'll want to push that all the way on there. And then you can take any excess slack in the tube and sort of pull it through the system. Next, take the brass adapter from the parts box, which is labeled GHT, that stands for garden hose threads, and thread it onto your garden hose, which is going to supply the FarmBot with the water. And then take the water tube coming from the cable carrier and put it onto the brass adapter. Next, take the seed trough holder, and you're going to attach it to the seed trough holder mount plate right here using 2 M5 by 30mm screws and some flange lock nuts. Now you can store the 2 seed troughs in the holder there, and optionally up to 3 of the lure lock needles for the seeder tool. Next, grab the cross slide and Z-axis pre-assembly from the main carton. Also get the 80mm cable carrier mount from the parts box, the M5 by 16mm screws and 2 flange lock nuts, and we're gonna attach this little bracket to the cross slide plate right here. It should be sticking out of the cross slide plate on the same side as all these cables, and you want the flange portion pointed up, so this large part on the bottom there. And you're gonna tighten this all up with, again, the 8mm wrench and the 3mm driver. Next, we're gonna slide the cross slide onto the gantry main beam. Like with putting the gantry columns onto the tracks, we're gonna need to adjust the lower 2 V wheels with the eccentric spacers and the 8mm wrench. So you can go ahead and give it an initial try, but it's probably gonna be either too tight or too loose. So give those spacers an 1/8 of a turn. Some more adjustments. There we go. Now, as you're starting to slide the cross slide on, if there's any interference down here, you may need to manually rotate the lead screw and raise the Z-axis up just a little bit to get it to clear the plate right there. It should feel smooth and solid and not be wobbly, while at the same time not having any significant resistance. Now grab the shorter belt in the kit. This is the Y-axis belt, and we're gonna attach it to the end of the extrusion here with the same method as the X-axis belts. Slide on the belt sleeve. Now, the positioning of the belt clip needs to be such that the tab is on the same side of the extrusion as the Z-axis extrusion. So route this through there, loop it back on itself, and slide the belt sleeve on there. And then using a 20mm nut bar and 2 M5 by 10mm screws, attach that in place. Take the loose end of the belt and route it under the V wheels of the cross slide. You may need to use the screwdriver to get it up here. And then route it over the pulley and back under the final wheel. And then secure the other end of the belt, again with the belt clips tab on the front of the FarmBot on the same side of the gantry main beam as the Z-axis extrusion. And you'll want to place about as much tension on that belt as you would use to tie your shoes. Next, take the Y-axis cable carrier and unroll it onto the horizontal cable carrier supports here along the gantry main beam. And the short end of the cables are going to be up top here to the cross slide, and the long end will be over here near the electronics box. Then you're going to attach the cable carrier to the cable carrier mount using 2 M5 by 16mm screws and flange lock nuts. And these screws should fit firmly through the cable carrier end piece as you're tightening them into the mounting bracket here. And then attach the other end to the cable carrier support that is closest to the electronics box using 2 more M5 by 16mm screws and M5 flange lock nuts. And again, this will have a little bit of friction going in. That's okay. Now connect the tube coming from the Y-axis cable carrier to the 90-degree barb coming from the Z-axis cable carrier. And you can pull the extra slack through the cable carrier like that. Then take this end and connect it to the top of the solenoid valve. Next, we're going to connect all of the cables from here with the cables coming from the Z-axis cable carrier. These all have screw together connectors, and all of the cables have labels. For example, vac for vacuum over on this side and vac for vacuum on this side. So just make sure that you're connecting the same label to the same label for each of them. These only go in one orientation, so you may need to rotate it a little bit before it goes in. And once you put it together, then you have to tighten the screws together a little bit, push it together a little more, tighten, push in one last time, and tighten it up. So do that for all of these cables. Now, be cautious because more than one of these cables has the same 4-pin connectors. So just make sure that you're following the labels instead of the connector type. And one note is that the ZY connects to the ZZ for the motor, which has 4 pins, and for the encoder, which has 8 pins. So once you've got all of them connected, you may need to undo a few connections and rearrange them and pull the slack through the end of the cable carrier here in order to get all of these nice and well organized. Then you're gonna still have 2 cables remaining, which have connectors on them like this. And that's for the Y-axis motor and the Y-axis encoder. You'll take them and you're gonna route them under the belt through this hole in this slot in the cross slide plate, and then connect them to the Y-axis motor. And then pull the extra slack through, making sure that you don't pull this too tight. Next, we're gonna install the tool bays. So FarmBot Genesis and Genesis XL come with 2 3-slot tool bays. And these are gonna be mounted on the short end of the bed. You can mount them anywhere along the length, but we recommend closer to the Y=0 position. You wanna make sure that these are level before connecting them. You don't wanna make them at an angle like this. In case your bed material is too thin, they might be too far away from the FarmBot, and you may need to add some extra material here to make sure that the FarmBot can reach these positions. So what I'm doing right now is I'm manually moving the FarmBot to make sure that it will be able to reach this position to pick up a tool. So I need to make sure that it can basically come far enough in this direction to be able to mount a tool that would be in this slot. So that's looking good. So I'm gonna go ahead and screw this tool bay in with the T25 wood screws. Now go ahead and slide all of the tools and seed containers into the tool bays. The ordering doesn't really matter because once you get to the software portion of the setup, you will tell the app and then the FarmBot where each of the tools are located. All right, now we are going to route all of the cables and connect them to the electronics box. So grab all of the cables coming from the Y-axis cable carrier and also the X2 cables coming and the LED strip coming from under here. And we are going to route them behind the solenoid valve and in between the solenoid valve mounts and the electronics box and this gantry column. So you can tape up the ends and fish it all through. You can also remove the solenoid valve mount temporarily and then put these all in there and reattach it. Once you've got all the cables routed behind the solenoid valve mount, you're gonna open up the electronics box and you're gonna route all of these cables up into the box here. So every cable is gonna have to be routed through the slot in the bottom, through one of these specific holes in what we call the super gland, which is these rubber components. So first, just pull the super gland out, and it comes out in 2 halves. Okay, so you'll notice that the X1 encoder and X1 motor and H2O, which is for the solenoid valve, those cables are already connected. What we still have left to do is the vacuum pump connector, the LED lighting strip, the X2, Y, and Z motor and encoders, the universal tool mount cable, and then the USB camera cable, which will plug into the Raspberry Pi up here. And finally, the power cable will come last. And all of the connectors will only fit in one direction. So there's a little locking tab, and it will only fit into the board in one orientation. Let's get started. So here's the vacuum pump connector. It's going to connect up here in the top right, which if you look close on the board underneath the connector, it says vacuum there. Next is the LED strip, which will plug in underneath where the solenoid valve is connected, and that goes into a connector labeled lighting. And we'll just proceed through all the rest of the connectors here. So we've got all the cables routed through the bottom slot. From the left to the right, it's the camera, the UTM, the 4 encoder cables, then the 4 motor cables, and then the 3 peripheral cables, and finally the power supply cable. So now we are going to reinsert the 2 super gland halves, and the largest diameter hole second from the left, and the second largest hole is over on the right for the power supply cable. So I recommend getting this behind the cables and maneuvering it into the slot there. And as you're doing this, starting to coax all of the cables into their final resting spot. So now we've gotten the back half in, and we are maneuvering the front half of the super gland in, again making sure to keep all of the cables in their respective slots, and everything should flow nicely to the area that it's plugged in on the inside. And this again will take a little bit of finagling to squeezing to get it all in. And what you're wanting is this top flange to be on the top surface and the bottom flange to be underneath the electronics box. So the super gland is in. The power supply should still be unplugged at this time. So unplugged from your wall outlet, but we're gonna plug this cable into the Farmduino board. Now that everything is plugged in, we need to install the FarmBot OS software onto the micro SD card that's located in the side of the Raspberry Pi. So carefully pull the micro SD card out. And then you're gonna need to plug this into your computer, and you may need to use the included micro SD to SD card adapter to plug this in. And then we have instructions for installing FarmBot OS on our documentation hub at software.farm.bot. Once you've got the software loaded on here, carefully reinsert this into the back of the Raspberry Pi. And now we can close up the electronics box. Next, we're going to install the waterproof power supply. So this is going to be attached to the wood raised bed using the same T25 wood screws as before. So start out by plugging in the end to the FarmBot. And this is a screw together connector that you want to make sure is fully connected and tightened down. Leaving a little bit of slack in the cable here, find a good spot to mount the power supply and then screw it in with the wood screws. Before we turn on the machine, we want to equalize the gantry. Gantry is equalized when it is not crooked left or right like this. So to equalize the gantry, gently pull on it from the center of the main beam and then let go. Now, if you don't have a GFCI protected outlet nearby, you can use an extension cord that is outdoor rated and the included power cord protector. Now, this doesn't mean that you can submerge this connection underwater, but it is going to provide some additional protection from the rain. And finally, it's time to plug in the power. So you'll want to plug into a GFCI protected outdoor outlet. And remember that once you plug in, you shouldn't really open the electronics box and start unplugging things or plugging things back in, because it will be powered up. So let's go ahead and plug this in. And now that the FarmBot is booting up, you'll see a flashing blue light and a flashing red light. The blue light means that FarmBot needs to be connected to the internet and it needs to be configured. So open up your phone and you can start the configuration process, and we have detailed instructions for that on our website at software.farm.bot. All right, and that concludes the unboxing and assembly of FarmBot Genesis version 1.7. Enjoy.